Every year in the nursery we get excited phone calls from a customer or two saying that their magnolia in their garden has flowered for the second time in September or October. And I thought today we'd just have a little look at secondary flowering in magnolias and think a little bit about why this happens and which magnolias you can see it in. Contrary to what some of our customers have thought and suggested to us that we might rush round and dig up their plant because it had unique value for flowering twice a year, I'm afraid we have to disappoint them. Magnolia Soulangeana, the shrubby magnolia that flowers in April and May, often flowers a second time. When it does, its flowers are a very different and usually much darker colour than those that you saw in the late spring. But usually the flowers are so hidden by the leaves that people tend not to see them, and very often there are not very many flowers anyway to see to start with. This is Magnolia March till frost, and its name is a bit of a giveaway in that it's one of those magnolias that has a flower on for a good many months of the year, but it only flowers properly as a completely deciduous shrub in probably March. And here we are again in September, seeing it in reasonably full flower. I suspect the drought has encouraged it to flower more. And in nature, why is it that the magnolia does that? I think it's just something innate in hybrids with Magnolia Soulangeana that throw up this garden oddity. It's nothing to worry about. The slugs and snails usually, as autumn develops, they love these flowers. Sometimes as they get browned off in the damp and the rain before they come out properly. But basically it's an added bonus and not something to worry about or think about too much. Magnolia March till frost, it has a very apt name, and it's probably exceptional as a magnolia in having this guaranteed second flush of flowers. But we're now going to go and look at a couple of other varieties of magnolia which exhibit similar characteristics and bring something to the early autumn garden, particularly after a summer's drought where the hydrangeas have been burnt to a frazzle and there hasn't been a great deal of show on the eucryphias. This is the New Zealand bred Magnolia Star Wars, which is famous for having a flower on it of some sort right through the year. And we're a little bit late. 3 weeks ago in mid-August there were 20 or 30 flowers on Star Wars, which are a bit earlier than usual because of the drought. The colour of the single flower you can see right up high on the tree is very different from the colour in the spring. It's rather darker, and that's fairly normal again. Magnolia Star Wars is a much bigger tree than the March till frost magnolia that we were looking at previously, and despite its size, it has Soulangeana again in its parentage, and that is what's responsible for it doing this secondary and even tertiary flowering. And if you just scan over the bush, you can see where 2 or 3 flowers quite close to the one that's still out have finished flowering and died off in the last week or two. You can also see, if you look closely, the buds for next spring, but I can assure you that even as the leaf falls off this in late November or early December, there'll still be a flower or two on Star Wars, and that's perfectly normal, and why it's one of the best-selling magnolias in the nursery, because it gives you something a bit extra. People always say, how long will that magnolia be out in flower? And probably the answer is about 3 weeks. But with Star Wars, you've got an opportunity to look at a flower for several months of the year, and that's why it's so popular. This is another guaranteed second flowerer, and this is Magnolia Yakeo. And actually, when we look closely, I mean, yes, there's a bit of slug damage and a bit of rain damage, but that isn't too bad a flower at all. And in the spring when it flowers, it has this nice combination of purpley pink outer tepals and whiteness on the inside of the tepals or the petals. And you can see that there are a flower or two more to come, and you can also see next spring's flower buds getting ready for next spring as we look around the plant. And this is about 25 years old, and it's about 12, 14, 15 feet tall. So it's not a huge growing magnolia, but there's really quite a good show of flowers on it. It's growing here in full sun, and it's maybe possible that in the stress of the drought it's produced a few more flowers than one would normally see. But each autumn Magnolia Yakeo is a certainty when it comes to delivering something a little bit different to cheer up the start of autumn. Magnolia Cleopatra is another New Zealand bred magnolia which doesn't secondarily flower every year, but's got a few rather nice deep purple flowers this year, and they're looking less slug eaten than usual. And you can see, if you look closely here, a next year's bud and a large seed head forming at the same time as we've got these rather attractive purple flowers. So that's Magnolia Cleopatra. We've just got one more to look at that's out in flower today in September. High up at the top of the tree there's one very dark coloured magnolia flower left on Magnolia Black Tulip. And Black Tulip is a very well-known magnolia. It is a remarkably dark colour, and the secondary flower we're looking at is also remarkably dark, and in fact very similar in shape and in colour to the spring flowering on Magnolia Black Tulip. A few weeks ago there were rather more flowers here, and they weren't perhaps as large as that. But again, Black Tulip it has its parentage in Magnolia Soulangeana, and it was another one originally bred and patented in New Zealand that's adapted particularly well to our climate. I wouldn't say it flowers at this time of the year or flowers twice every year, but when it does, it's something to look out for. And I have to say, on a night after a night of rain, it's great to see something flowering in the garden as we have today.